Welcome, folks, to Ask Strong Towns Anything. Glad to have you all here in person, or I guess not in person, but live and virtual together with Chuck Marohn today. And for those that are watching this afterwards, thanks for taking some time out of your day to give thought to some of the various questions that you'll hear covered in our session today. With us is Chuck Marohn, founder and president of Strong Towns, and someone that has been thinking about all of these core questions for a long time. And the first one that we want to pull up together is if I can get my scenes to work, is a question from Jake. Here, I'll just spotlight this so it's a little more visible to everybody. What is your opinion, Chuck, on hawk signals, and what should we think about them? Are they a value in our community? What is your impression of them? And I found a little GIF that does the work for me of explaining just exactly what it is. Chuck?
Well, okay. I feel like with all of these devices, the devil's always in the details, right? Like where you put it and what you do with it. The hawk signal in its like base core is that mid block or a place where you don't otherwise have a safe crossing, you can put this signal in, someone walks up, presses the button, and it will either completely stop traffic or highlight where you're at or whatever. It is meant to in a sense, make you more visible when you're crossing. Springfield, for anyone who's read my book, Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, the solution that the Springfield engineers came up with originally was to put a hawk signal in. That was then shot down for a bunch of reasons. I feel like when we put these in as a temporary measure, it can alleviate things and address problems. I fear situations where they become the default and also where they are kind of like a permanent installation. Like this is our solution to this problem. Because understand what you have. You have a conflict where you have traffic that is moving at lethal speeds, where you have enough people trying to cross on foot or on bike, where you have a conflict. To me, that is a street environment. The hawk says, nope, we're going to keep this a strode environment. So we're still going to have fast cars and we're still going to have people crossing, but we're going to try to manage that by having more visibility of someone who's trying to cross. You will still run into situations where people, for whatever reason, don't slow down, don't stop, don't see it. You will have rear end collisions. You will have all kinds of negative things happen. And in fact, that was why it got killed in Springfield, because they said, well, we're just going to have a bunch of rear end collisions. Yes, you are, because the problem is the mixing of high speed traffic and, people trying to cross that traffic stream. The ultimate solution that we should be trying to get to is on streets, slower traffic speeds, like much less kinetic energy. The hawk system doesn't get us there. And I think when I see engineers propose them, what I see is engineers clinging to the idea that speeds must be fast in all instances. And I think that's the thing we need to get beyond. So Norm, what do I think if we said good? Yes, in certain circumstances as a transition to something better, but not as like the solution. Is that fair? Oh, you're muted. So, that's my favorite version of Norm, but I did.
That's right. Jay asked a follow-up question of, would a speed hump with raised crosswalks be a better option? So raising that elevation, depending on the road, I suppose is part of the answer, but
it's interesting. All of us have had the experience of hitting a speed bump at high speeds. We've all had that experience because if you don't see it, you don't see it. And if it sneaks up on you, or you may, I feel like speed bumps and speed tables and all that are, again, like transitionary kind of things to get us to an environment where speeds are just generally slower. The way you slow speeds is you narrow up lanes, you create edge friction, you make it so that the driver feels unsafe driving at speeds that are too high. And the way you do that is to limit the movement and actually have the complexity of the place apparent to the driver. And when the complexity of the place is apparent, the driver will slow down because the driver doesn't want to hit things. Um, so all of these, I'm just going to call them like gimmicks, the hawk signal, a speed bump, these are ways to overcome the high speed design in a what I would think of at best as a transitionary way to get us to a better design.
Yeah.
So I hate to like say hawks are bad, speed bumps are bad, speed tables are bad, because a lot of people put a lot of effort into getting this and they're like, hey, we accomplished something. And I don't want to say you haven't accomplished something. I just think when you do that, there should be a recognition that that is part of a transition to something where you would actually have high speed roadways where we're moving people quickly and then we get conflict out of the way, or areas where we are trying to have complexity and a place, in which case we lower speeds dramatically.
Yeah. It's interesting with the raised crosswalk, at least it is doing two things at once. It is not only elevating sort of the visibility of the pedestrian, it's making it a little bit easier if you're in a wheelchair. And it, whereas a speed bump, I always feel like does one thing and only one thing, which is just to alter the roadway, but not really in a super helpful way. And then the other challenge with some of these hawk signals is if I'm a pedestrian and I just jaywalk before the signal turns, then people look at that and say, this is junk infrastructure because I have to sit here, wait, the cycle is going, and everybody with a sane mind recognizes that there was no need for it in the first place. And that can fuel its own sort of backlash to those types of conditions in our spaces.
I think the more we, I mean, the more we dumb places down, the more we get dumb behavior. And so, where was I in Tucson last week when I dropped my kid off for college? They have these huge long blocks and they have transit stops in the middle of them. And so, if you were going to walk to the light and around, you in 105-degree heat, so everybody jaywalks. They put in a lot of these hawk signals, and the problem with their use of them is that they put it in and it goes and it's got a long window. So it'll be like a 45-second window. Well, it might take the person in a bunch of instances, someone biked across the street. So like literally they're crossing 5 seconds and then everybody sits there for 40 seconds waiting for the queue to go ahead. People would just start driving through them. They would just start ignoring them because you're not that dumb. Like you can figure it out. I think when we dumb things down for the driver, what we are doing is inviting the driver to disengage. And when the driver disengages, that's when tragedies happen. What we actually have to do is say, drivers are smart, let's engage them. Let's get them as active participants in driving and in the roadway and in the street and in the complexity. And then they will be more aware and more engaged and we'll get better outcomes.
Yeah. Oh, that's super helpful. Great stuff in the chat as well. I'm going to go on to a question that we had from Kelly in Chandler, who said, what is the Strong Town's definition of wealth? That was something that she was asked by a council member. And I think it's a great, important question, especially tied into the book that you're working on and sort of broader questions that we sometimes get on the pushback between, well, isn't wealth just for people that already have wealth?
Yeah.
Is it, I think there's was the comment about being rich versus being wealthy. I do want to just touch on what is Strong Town's definition of wealth?
I think most times when you see us use this, we will put the adjective community wealth or the modifier community wealth in front of it. I think the best analogy that I would use would be a garden. How do you look at a bountiful garden? You would say that the garden as a whole is growing up, like it is producing a lot of return for the time and investment and energy in sunlight, in fertilizer, in soil, and water, and in your time weeding. You're getting a high return of that. You can certainly grow monocultures that produce high output in like one dimension. You can plant a tree and have everything go vertically. But when you think about a garden, what the goal of the garden is to actually have things in the right place, things in the right vertical space, so that you're actually cultivating the entire thing, and the overall, if we want to say wealth of your garden, the overall productivity of your place is going to be increasing. The way that we measure wealth it would be different than what in to say like, hey, we've got a Walmart, and Walmart is like a very wealthy, generates a lot of wealth in one place. I think the way Joe Minicozzi's taught us to look at this, where you normalize it per acre, is actually more revealing from the community standpoint because it more correlates to the amount of expense we have put into actually building that wealth. And so when you normalize things by per acre, you're in a sense spreading it out over a broader area, and you're recognizing that wealth is a cumulative thing that includes everybody, not a spot point thing that tries to, in a sense, compensate for all the places that have a lack of wealth. Is that Does that make sense, Norm? I
Yeah.
always use you as my gauge. Like, does that resonate?
Yeah, it does. And I'm dropping in Joe Minicozzi's article on mansion blight as one example of how there can be this real tension between, places that are perceived to be wealthy, but actually not creating capacity for the community. So another way to describe it is like, the bathtub analogy that I think that the economic gardening folks use, and how much is in that bathtub, but is it also being shared in that space, or is it just being drained out and leaked away? And the idea that we would be suspicious of wealth or suspicious of prosperity is something that really doesn't, arrive for me, because I always say, no matter what your view of taxation is, we will always need to take a percentage of the privately held value to then fund things that we share in common together. And so you can quibble about how much, but you need to have something. And the more something that we have, we can actually begin to afford more. We can have gardeners in our parks to think of what we used to have, and we have lost that capacity.
Well, I think you can equate wealth with capacity in terms of a community. So if you don't have any community wealth, you really have limited community capacity. Um, I I think to understand the genesis of my use of this word, understand that I spent 2 decades in city council meetings where everything was based around growth. How do we grow? How do we get that next thing of growth? And it was, you alluded to the next book I'm writing, just for our friends here. I just signed the contract when I was on my short vacation taking my kid to college, for the next book. And the next book is going to be about economic development. I've actually started writing it. And the very first chapter looks at the tension between growth and community outcome. Uh, and I'm starting with this kind of obsessive growth fight that Brainerd and Baxter, my two neighboring cities here, had back in the 90s, where they were trying to grab their little bit of the highway frontage because that was seen as growth. If we just grow, we got to grow. If we can grow, we'll be doing well. How do we get more growth, 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 growth? Growth as a metric is really a dumb metric. I know, we could grow our nonprofit, we could grow our business, we could grow our waistline, we could grow our whatever, if we are willing to sacrifice tomorrow. You can always grow today. Building wealth creates another dimension to growth, and that is a dimension of time. And so for me, what I saw over and over and over again at council meetings was that people would come in and say, well, I'm concerned about X. X could be the environment, or it could be the poor, or it could be, name your thing that you're concerned about. And the council members would sit there like good, earnest people, and they would wring their hands and they would say, oh, that's really bad. And then someone else would come in and say, hey, there's a growth opportunity. And everything else would get tossed to the side, and it was all about growth. If we can get cities, you're not going to get them to stop talking about investment and growth and all that. But if we can shift the language from growth to wealth creation, it adds another dimension of time that will have them ask more sophisticated questions that actually correlate better to all of those X things that we're also interested in. And do it in a way that is not, I think the idea of degrowth or anti-growth, we can talk about this in, philosophy class, but the reality of the world that we live in is that cities are obsessed with growth. How do we turn that energy into something that is more positive, broadly speaking?
Yeah.
Does that,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
know we get pushback every now and then because people equate wealth with like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates. And okay, fine. Like to me, that is a bizarre outcropping of the system we've created. That's not the way we're talking about community
Yeah.
wealth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll drop in the chat as well your article on the density question, where you introduced the idea that there's a ratio of how much privately held wealth is needed in order to
Yeah.
be able to justify or sustain a certain level of public spending, especially when we think of infrastructure and things like this. So, which has been useful, and it's a good ratio to use when people, in my city, we have for every $1 public investment that we're committed to maintaining, we only have $3 of private investment. That
Yeah.
means that we're not healthy, and it should be 20 or even 40 to 1. And when you put it that way, people begin to understand why the interaction of those things really matters.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And at 3 to 1, you're actually in a better shape than a lot of cities,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah,
great, which is
yeah,
crazy,
yeah.
crazy.
We're not 1 to 1. Yeah.
Or
Um,
Lafayette, Louisiana was 1 to 2. So they have $2 of public investment for every $1 of private investment. That's the most upside down ratio you can. How do you squeeze $2 out of $1 of wealth? No matter what your time frame is, you just can't do it. It's insolvent. It makes no sense. So yeah.
or you live there while the buffet's open, and then
Yeah.
you head out before any of the
Yeah.
work needs to be done to pay for it.
You bug out before all those
Yeah.
big drainage systems fail, and then your city continually floods, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We've got a question from Chris in Bloomington. Our old affordable neighborhoods were being turned into rentals. We reversed that. We've promoted it, but does density trump ownership? Because all of these areas are being threatened again. Is it okay to increase property values that upzoning causes makes home ownership more difficult? Does that matter anymore? Sort of the runaway acceleration of land value, all of maybe some of the layers that are there, but also yeah, we'll have another question on property turned into rentals as well, especially vacation rentals and short-term rentals.
That's an interesting question. I feel like there's a lot there that I'm not grasping, because does density trump ownership? I'm really am not sure what that means. It feels to me like what is being asked is this struggle that happens when you get rising property values when you upzone. And I'm really sensitive to this because I'm okay. I'm amongst friends here, right? I'm really sensitive to this because I feel like every time I have this conversation, which to me is like a deep, nuanced conversation, I get the yimbys that come after me and are like, "You are," and then fill in your pejorative. Uh, there is in a functioning system, which we largely do not have today for many, many reasons. In a functioning system, there's a relationship between the value of the land and the value of what is built on the land. I made this case in the first book and the third book. In the first book, I talk about San Francisco or San Diego as being incoherent to me, because you will go down the street and you'll have single family home, 20-story condo unit, single family home. And the question that I ask is, well, what is this land worth? Is this land worth enough to justify a 20-story tower, or is this land only worth enough to justify a single family home? In extreme cases, you would never build a mobile home park in Manhattan because the land values are too high, right? We would look at that and say that's absurd. You would never build a 20-story condo unit in the middle of Kansas because the land values are so low. Like, how could you justify that? It wouldn't work. So in a functioning market, there's a ratio between the two, and that ratio is somewhere between 3 to 1 and 5 to 1 in what it should look like. And I say that because we've looked back historically and looked at like what this looks like in a functioning market. When we rapidly upzone property, what happens is that you are allowed to build way more than what the property was originally. And that has a tendency to, because everybody doesn't go and sell their land. We don't flood the market with land. Land will come on the market a little bit at a time. we tend to see these big spikes in density, and we drag up the land values. Dragging up the land values is like great for local government because it increases taxes without increasing tax rates. And there's, everybody's getting rich and da da da. But the reality is it's an artificial drag up, and it stagnates all the properties around it because now they're queued in at like a higher dollar amount. The way you deal with this is your upzoning is incremental. And this is the YIMBYs get really, really mad at me because they're like, Chuck, if we do incremental, why are we going so slow? We should just be building, building, building wherever anybody can build. The reality is that when we do these rapid upzonings, we actually stagnate the land, not release it. If we take a neighborhood of single family homes and we say the next increment of development intensity is duplexes, triplexes, backyard cottages. Now, all of a sudden, the land value is going to have to be based on that increment. You can't price the land for a 20-story condo unit. You just can't. You can't price it for an apartment building. You can't, because you're not going to be able to build that. You're going to be able to build something else. And so what will happen is that over time, people will start adding those units, and that improvement value to land value ratio will settle in that 3 to 5 to 8 range again. Um, when I look at this question, what I see is a struggle with that incremental side of it. We need to upzone because we need more units. Upzone, land values go wild. People get displaced. It's better to do a Airbnb than it is a home. It's better to do a rental. All these like things that I think in a natural situation would be tensions, but would work themselves out. Now don't have options to work themselves out. We artificially like freeze and stick our markets in ways that are not helpful for building more housing. So, Norm, maybe we can get the other question on housing density too, because
Yeah.
I'm struggling with maybe getting too much nuance in this one.
Yeah. Well, this one is one that you've certainly had to cover at times. There's a town code that allows ADUs because that's a form of infill, neighborhood investment taking place. But how do you prevent, or should you prevent, them from becoming short-term rentals?
That is a really interesting question. And I apologize to everybody because I tend to answer every question with, well, it depends. There's nuance here. And I think one of the challenging things about a strong towns approach is that we recognize at the beginning and the end that there is nuance, and this is not a one size fits all. And I think you will hear other people saying, oh, of course, in every instance, it should be this, or of course, in every instance. And the reality is like, it depends. If you looked at my hometown of Brainerd, I'm looking out the window here. We do not have a short-term rental problem. Like we do not have, our affordable problem is not that they're being bought up and made into short-term rentals. If we could get 10 ADUs built in this neighborhood and 5 of them became short-term rentals for nurses who were working at the hospital, which is kind of the way our short-term rentals work. They wind up to be long, like midterm rentals. That would be a great outcome because we would have 5 new ADUs that were not short-term rentals. Like I would take that trade-off, right? If we were in a more a city that was more dependent on tourism, or where tourism was a dominant thing, then having every ADU gobbled up with a short-term rental would probably not be all that helpful. It'd probably be very defeating because everybody would have a car, everybody would have, there's all these other things that would go along with being a visitor as opposed to being a resident. And in that kind of a place, yeah, I think I might say like, hey, you can only have leases that are 60 days or longer, or, something along those lines to make it more permanent. I think that we have to be open to a bunch of different approaches based on different places. I think the only thing that is universal is that we have to allow that next increment of intensity because what we want is we want people and the marketplace, the local market, to be able to respond to opportunity and stress in ways that are novel. And when we
Mhm.
clamp down and we say, you can't do this or you can't do that, we limit people's ability to respond. And then, stresses build up and they are unresolved. So I am all about giving people more options, although within that range, so it doesn't become distorting.
Yeah.
Norm, would you
Want to highlight.
would you have
Go.
backyard would you have ADUs in your city? I mean, if they were short-term rentals, I don't think that would necessarily be a problem where you're at, would it?
No, and especially because we only recently began to allow up to 4 units on each property, and many people are just looking at it and saying, I can do a backyard suite, I can do a mother-in-law cottage, I can do all sorts of different things, and some of those are going to get rented, some of them are not. I think Greg Sund in Colorado has made the point every short-term rental needs to be treated as the business that they are, and this has been one of those interesting things where hotels are subject to fees and inspections and all of those things, and there was this sort of loophole that old classic B&Bs never, they had their own code that they followed. And I know the federal government in Canada has started sending tax bills to properties that they've determined have been rented for more than 6 months. And they said, you're running a business in this property. So it is not a residence. And it sort of touches on your concern about the fraud in the housing mortgage industry, that when homes are declared as a primary resident, you basically, we create a whole bucket of sweeteners to help you stay in your home, not be dwarfed by it. But we recognize like we can't extend that to every house. It needs to go to households where the primary occupant is the owner. And so there's an interesting way when you remove the ability to sort of take advantage of that primary residence sort of loophole, why you're not paying any commercial taxes to your city, all of a sudden behavior changes and a whole bunch of people dropped their rentals off of the market as soon as they realized, oh, I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound on this one.
So Minicozy and I, next month in September, are presenting at the IAAO or IAO, some acronym. It's the assessing officers. So assessors from around North America have a conference. This year it's at Disney World. Joe talked me into going, and him and I are presenting on short-term rentals. And the way we're doing this, because we want the people to wake up to this. Um, we are dividing the crowd up and we're having them argue two sides, kind of like a debate. And I've got debaters on both sides, and then we're going to have a big kind of production out of it. But the idea is to have someone credible arguing, nope, these are residences, they should be taxed as residences. And then some people credibly arguing, no, these are commercial properties and hotels, they should be taxed as such. And obviously, I agree with the second one. I think when these arguments get a fair hearing in a place like this, that will be the consensus argument. And hopefully we can get assessors, because there's a lot of discretion in the way assessors go out and do their work.
Right.
I think when we start to build momentum around that, now I think you have I was going to say legitimate, but I think you have a more authentic representation of what the market is doing. Like you said, Norm, you're not subsidizing Airbnbs with, mortgage fraud. You are
Mhm.
taxing them the way that they should be taxed, which is a commercial property.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we get what we tax for, this is a very clear indication of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, that
Um,
that sets to me, like having a marketplace is that there are feedback loops. And if you get this proliferation of ADU rentals, um, I do think that what you are doing is undermining your residential market, and you're also undermining your commercial hotel market because you're letting this thing, in a sense, operate in a free space.
yeah. All right, I'm going to give you 7 minutes on this question because at around 10:40, we're going to try to go over to the Del Campo High School question that
Okay.
Nicole had submitted for her students. But Aaron Caldwell, he's on the call here, had asked, "Hey, we've got a preference identified for large yard detached single homes, and so they've done market studies, and that's what people want.
Mhm.
People that
Yeah.
say I don't value walkability or access to amenities. I would, and I don't want to live in a place that has a density greater than 10 units per acre, which is a very literate individual to know what 10 units per acre feels like. But I digress. That causes problems. What do we do to change people's mind on this?
It so many thoughts. Okay. I'm gonna start with the psychology one. If you ask people what they want, you will actually get really dumb answers. And this is true across many domains throughout all of history. One of the dumbest things you can do is actually ask people their preference. People will show you and express their preference through their actions, but if you actually ask them theoretically, they will not they will not actually be able to state their preference. They will state what you think their preference should be. They will state what they think is like a socially acceptable preference, but they will not. John Maynard Keynes captured this in his I can't remember what he called it, but it was like a beauty contest analogy. And his whole thing was we would send people a list, and this is the 30s. So, and John Maynard Keynes was gay, by the way. So you cut me a whole bunch of slack in telling this story because it's a little sexist in today's realm. But basically, you would send pictures of women to people and say, okay, here's 10 women. Which one of these do you think will win a beauty contest? The phrasing of that question is not which one do you think is most beautiful? It is which one do you think other people will think is most beautiful? And so that requires you to do 2 degrees of thinking. You think about not just what you would think, but what do you think other people's opinions are? And he used this as an analogy for the market. I think that Microsoft stock is going to go up, not because I think Microsoft is a great company, but because I think all you idiots out there are going to buy Microsoft despite it being a bad company, right? Like it is an analogy for how markets work, but it's a great insight into human nature. When we ask people direct questions, they don't actually ask. What you have to do is you have to actually put them in a situation where they can express that preference through their actions.
Mhm.
When we take people out and we walk streets with them, and we say, do you like this house? Do you like this house? Do you like this house? What we find is that the preference has very low correlation with density. It has a very high correlation with urban design and architecture. And so we can have homes that people are like, this is horrible. And it will be, really low density and, single family homes, et cetera. We can take people out and walk around the neighborhood and they'll say, oh my gosh, that's really fantastic. And I'm like, do you realize that's 8 units? And he's like, no, I had no idea that was 8 units because architecturally it's designed different. The most valuable real estate in North America, like the real estate that people express the highest preference for in terms of what they're willing to pay, also has the greatest density. And so the idea that, people have a strong preference for A, B, or C is not reflected in any data. Let me make one last observation on this. When people say they prefer single family homes, here's what I hear. I hear Henry Ford saying you can have any color Model T you want as long as it's black. Today in the marketplace, you want to buy a home? We have Easy Street for buying a single family home. You can go into a bank. If you have a job and a credit score, you can go and get a home. We've got a very systematic, easy way to set things up to do it. If you go through that process and you're living in the home, we have a very strong kind of human psychological effect to say, this is good. Like my situation is good. Other people should want my situation. And so what I see is a reflection of reality or of people's lived experience more than choosing from a range of preferences. If you say everybody who buys a Model T in the 19 teens bought a black Model T, there must be an overwhelming preference for black. Well, okay, sure. But that was literally the only color you could get. Show me a marketplace where you have other options that are available to you. Now, 10 units per acre is the other option that's available to you today, because what we do is we have an easy glide path again for the 2.5 dozen big builders who build 5/1s and big condo units. And so, yes, if you step back in the marketplace today and you don't know how property's developed, how things work, and you say, do you want option Easy Street option A or Easy Street option B? these are two like vastly different things. If you said, here's 20 different kinds of mustard in the store, all with a little variation and nuance of each other, what you would see is that people have preferences all over the place. If we had that same thing with housing, what you would see is that people have preferences all over the place. I don't find this kind of conclusion credible in any way. And so to me, like, how do you help change people's minds on this? The first thing you do is you actually state why we should not find this credible. And the second thing is you start building other things in the marketplace and see if they sell.
Mhm.
One last thing, I know we're going to bring in the Del Campo people. One thing that I see a lot in planning commissions and city council members is that they index on what they want and believe that everybody wants that. And so what you see is a lot of plan commissions will be dominated by people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, a lot of city councils as well. And they'll say, well, no one wants to live in an ADU. No one wants to live in a duplex. No one wants to live in and fill in the blank because they themselves don't, and they don't know anybody else who does. But the reality is that for different generations at different points in life, people do have that desire. Every preference comes at a price point, and people will choose all kinds of different things at all different kinds of price points if you give them the opportunity to do so.
Mhm. Yeah.
Del Campo.
Yes. Here, let's bring up Nicole onto the stage. Hey, Nicole and her
Oh my
team. Wow, look
gosh.
at that. Do unmute yourself so we can.
I'm so excited to see all of you. You
Woohoo.
guys are fantastic. I've been following your
Yeah,
work and watching what you've been doing, and I'm just really, really thrilled. I told our team that I want to get out to Del Campo at some point in the near future,
that
because
would
you
be
guys
so
are
cool.
awesome. Yeah. So thank you for being here. Cool to see you all. Okay, what's the cat? Is that your school? Is that your school?
Yeah, it's a cougar. We're the Del Campo Cougars. And last year, when we were still a part of a club, we were able to go to the Sacramento Department of Transportation. And something they gave us on our tour was a sign with our mascot on it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing.
I love it. Um, Nicole, do you want to ask the question that you submitted, or shall I read it for your team?
Why don't you go ahead and read it?
All right. So they had 4 questions for you, Chuck. What is the largest issue you've dealt with so far? And it can't be Canadians. Second, what was the thing that pushed you towards change? Third, when did you realize that there was a problem with the way we address roadways? And then fourth, what tips do you have for talking with city planners? Great
Wow.
questions to the team as well, or to the students. Wow, that's awesome. Good
Yeah,
stuff.
these are really, really good questions. Um, let me deal with the first one. I feel like the biggest issue that I've, besides dealing with self-improvement, right, which is always the biggest issue we all have to deal with, I feel like recognizing that every conversation about change is a conversation about humans. It's about stories. It's about messiness. I think when I was younger, I thought if I just had the best insight or the best argument or the best logic, or I had the good study or the most facts, that people would listen to me. If I could stand up and say, like, logically, this is how it should be done, and let me help you see that logic would win out. And it took me, and I'm maybe a slow learner. I'm also an engineer, so kind of steeped in rational thought. It took me a long time to recognize that humans communicate in stories, and that if we actually want to change people's minds, we have to first change their heart. We have to actually talk to them in a way that they can relate to and understand and see themselves in, and then they'll be open to other things. So for me, the largest issue in the work that we've done is, I think, this transition from talking about these things in just strictly logic, rational terms, to talking about them in ways that connected to people. The things that your next 2 questions kind of fit together in my mind, like what was the thing that pushed me towards change, and then when did I realize there was a problem in roadways, but I think in more general too in our development pattern. When I was a young man working as an engineer, I came back to my hometown and I was doing projects, and I thought, I'm making my city a better place. Like it really mattered to me that I was making things better for my community, a place that I cared about. And I started to be more senior, more elevated in the decisions that I got to make. And that opened my eyes to, you've all heard the story of the emperor has no clothes, right? When you're a young entry level engineer, when you're a young entry level planner, you have a lot of questions, but you assume that someone higher up has the answers. Like someone else has figured this out. The project I'm working on seems kind of dumb, but someone really smart must have this figured out. When I became or started to get close to the people who were really smart who had this figured out, I realized that the emperor had no clothes because I would start to ask questions like, okay, we're spending $10 million on this. How much development do we actually think is going to happen? And how much money is that going to actually get us? And when the most wildly optimistic scenario for a $10 million project was $1 million, I'm like, this project doesn't make any sense. Like, what are we doing? I had a couple year period of time where I'm not going to go as far as to say I had like a mental breakdown, but I had like an OCD compulsion where I'm like, none of this makes sense. Let me go and look at every project I've ever worked on and see if it penciled out, see if it made sense. And then none of them did. And so I spent a good deal of time trying to reconcile the thought that I was doing good for my community with the reality that I was actually making my place poorer. The whole idea of roads and streets came out of that because I was trying to solve a problem about how do we make good transportation investments, because most economic development today is about investing in transportation. How do we make good transportation investments that pay off? And what I discovered was that when we move cars very quickly between places, that actually makes those places stronger, better. When we spend time and energy making a place a really nice place to live, that also makes the place more valuable. And those two kind of ends of the spectrum strongly also correlate with safety. And so I developed this term STRODE to define that street road combination because I was looking for a way to explain an investment that didn't work and also an outcome that didn't create safety, that was undermining safety. And so I wish I could say that I was focused on safety first. I wasn't. I was focused on how do we actually build strong places? And I got to the safety because it was aligned with that. Last question, what tips do you have for talking to city planners? I have one, and that is I think we have to have empathy whenever we have these conversations. For the most part, whether it's engineers, planners, city managers, elected officials, everybody wants to do a good job. I've rarely run into people who are psychotic and like truly don't care about anything but themselves. I mean, that's a caricature we often talk about with people, but it's really a caricature that does a disservice. Most people like deeply, deeply care. And so I think if we can walk into a place and say, for every one word we'll speak, we're going to listen for 3 or 4 words. We're going to try to understand the motivations of the person. We're going to try to address those motivations while making our points. If we can start with empathy, I think what you will do is turn people who might have a tendency to be defensive, like, oh, don't be critical of me, or don't tell me what to do, or boy, you don't know enough that I know. And we can start to have them explaining things in a way that will help them understand. The best thing that you can ever do in an interaction with a planner or an engineer or any city official is to get them explaining their point of view. And if you can get them to explaining their point of view and ask them questions about it, often because so much of our development pattern is incoherent, they will reveal to themselves their own lack of understanding. And I think, we try to write articles and share things to help like move that conversation along. throw us under the bus. You know, I hear what you're saying, but Strong Towns has said this, and this makes a lot of sense. How would you respond to that? You know, I hear and understand what you're talking about, but boy, it seems really dangerous when you've got high speed traffic with people turning right onto it or trying to cross the street. How do we deal with that? Um, when we can start with empathy and get the other person talking, they will tend to travel closer to you than if we go in and like give them our points and then hope they hear it. Does that make sense?
Love that. And maybe Nicole and the students, do you want to share what are you going to be working on this semester as you start up a new school year? Would love to hear if there's anything that's sort of what more can we expect out of Del Campo? And love what you guys are doing. Do you want to share just a little bit more as we get close to the top of the hour?
Yeah, so we developed this class kind of following the Confessions of a Recovering Engineer. So we're reading that throughout the course. And we're also working towards building our statistics knowledge and applying that to gathering data about our streets and roadways around us. Our goal is for students to have like little mini crash analysis studios for the first term, and then kind of hone in on maybe one or two of those projects and do a full crash analysis studio with some community experts as our final.
And do you take 40-year-old students?
Close. We're also working on the long-term project too. The street that our high school is on has some traffic issues where we have cars driving really fast down it. We don't have sidewalks on parts of it, and so that's a second part of our class is we're working with our county Department of Transportation to see if we can resolve some issues there.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'll tell you all in this class that one of the magic powers that youth have is that when you show up, it is surprising to most elected officials, and they will stop and listen to you. They will. And what you find is that when you engage, your words will have more weight than the typical person's. And that may be, that's again like a human quirk. But if you do the statistical work and follow through with this, you'll find that you can have an oversized impact because people will listen to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I?
It takes a while.
Right.
And yeah.
Can we say, I'm gonna have the students say thank you for answering our questions. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Nicole, can I add one thing before we go?
Yeah.
You all have my book there, both of my books, and it's so, I want you to know how much it means to me. I have a lot of people who email me and contact me and say, hey, how do I do the work that you're doing? How do I have a blog and a podcast? And how do I, do what you're doing? I want you to know that there were many, 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 many years where I just tried to do the best job that I could and learn as much as I could and read as much as I could. I was not a great student. I tried hard. I worked at things. I think that, the advice that I always give to people is just try to do the best you can at the thing in front of you and do that day after day after day after day. There's no like shortcut. There's no magic path. And I just am really inspired by young people, especially who are saying, I want to make the world a better place. There's a lot of people who will tell you that you have to start really big or you have to hitch your wagon to some great politician or support some big thing. Often the thing that you do is just start with picking up trash on your street or doing a small thing to make your school a little bit better. Those muscles, when you build them up, will take you a long, long ways. And you have something that I don't have, and Norm has a little bit more than me, but not much. But you have time. You spend 20 years doing little things that add up and build up, and you're not even as old as Norm, and you're certainly not as old as me. And that would be like life changing. So keep going. I'm really proud of all of you, and I'm really humbled by the fact that you're digging into this. So please keep going.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank
Love
you.
that. Go Cougars.
Go
Awesome.
Cougars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. Awesome. And where are the students? They are in at Del Campo High School in Fair Oaks, California. Did I get that right? There's some nods.
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
Awesome. Good. Yeah. And they are heroes, and we'll love what they're doing. Nicole, your work and others in the school just fostering an environment that says, hey, let's look very at the granular level, at the local level, identify what we can be doing. What is the next smallest thing that we can do, and then begin to address that struggle. So that's really powerful. We are basically at our closing time. We've squeezed you in. I always like here, we'll let the students relax a little bit by taking them off spotlight. But Chuck, why don't you close? You've got 5 minutes. You're with friends, Strong Towns members, high school students, all the way to retirees. Touch a little bit on just what are you noticing? What are you seeing out there as you've been traveling, taking a little bit of personal time? What is that? Where are you at? And how are you doing?
Thanks, man. I always, September starts, and September's always like the back to school time, right? Like the end of summer. Here in Minnesota, we have very distinct seasons. So it's been 45 degrees at night. We're starting to slip into fall. And I start to get that, that sense of like time slipping away. How do we keep moving? We've got a big tour coming up. Norm's going to be out on the road. I'm going to be out on the road. We're trying to reach as many places as we can and share this message. I said I signed the next book contract, and so I've actually started working on that. And, internally, we've got two big things coming out over the next 2 months. We've got a big thing coming out on housing, a second toolkit in the 3-part toolkit series, backing up escaping the housing trap, the implementation stuff we're giving the cities. And then we've got a big white paper we're releasing on reforming federal highway spending and federal highway transportation system. These are like huge initiatives, and I'm really jazzed because we're seeing tremendous enthusiasm in the movement, tremendous growth in what we're doing, and it's usually I am the one who's like, Norm can attest. I'm like, let's go, push, come on, like we can do more. And I think we're actually like starting to outstrip my ability to even do that. So I'm just really grateful for everybody on this call and for everybody who's pushing on this. We always said that momentum would come from everybody doing what they can. And what we see is that there's thousands and thousands of people now doing what they can. And it is starting, it is not starting, it is started. It is way along the path of building some real true momentum to the point where the people who are contacting us and calling us now are blown away by the stuff that people are out there doing. And as I am. Let me give you one last anecdote. And Norm, we probably shouldn't put this one on YouTube if you're cutting this up. They are super interested in what we're doing. They feel like we're the answer to a lot of the problems that they've been pushing on for a long time. They want to get us connected to a bunch of places, and they initiated the call, not us. That is not because I'm different or because we're different. It's because thousands of people have now plugged in. They're sharing our stuff. They're talking about it. They're putting these ideas to work in their place. And that is what's being noticed more than anything else. So I'm just really, really excited because we can see the fruits of this coming to harvest. And it's really it's invigorating in so many ways. Norm?
Awesome.
You got to highlight you, not me now.
I do. Got to bring it back. Just one quick note while we're here. I definitely want to encourage people, if you are especially a technical professional or elected officials in your community, we're about to run another session of the Strong Towns Accelerator. And the Strong Towns Accelerator is you'll receive personalized coaching in, I think it's a 6 to 8 week sort of span, working together through the Strong Towns Bottom Up Revolution book to explore the Strong Towns approach and how that finds its application in your community. So it's pretty intense, but definitely worth it. So definitely go and check that out if you or someone that you know is interested. We also have the Strong Towns cohort. Definitely take a moment to learn about that. If you're interested, the Strong Towns cohort is a leadership group that meets for over about 6 to 8 months and then culminates at the national gathering. So these are some of the programs that we're rolling out. And then I also shared the info for the oh, that didn't work. For the places that work tour in the chat, but definitely want to encourage people to check that as well. With that, we are at the top of the hour. Each of us have responsibilities to carry out, classes to attend, all sorts of good things that are on the works. So thank you for attending. Really appreciate you being here, Chuck, as well. Good to have you dropping in, and hoping we'll see you again in a month or hopefully soon to do another round of this. There certainly are many more questions, and as always, appreciate the work that you do as Strong Towns members, building up your community, being that strong citizen in your place. And with that, we want to support everything that you're doing, and this is one of the ways that we've found that we can do that. So thank you for attending. Good to see you all today.